Tell me about your practice and others within your network about how you are advancing your practice, taking your practice to the next level in terms of clinical trials. Are you doing dosimetry, radiopharmaceutical dosimetry? Is that something that you aim to do? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I think first off, the biggest driver is as you get a new practice going is you want to get some volume and some expertise, right? And so as practices are starting to do radiopharm, whether it's my practice or another practice, I really encourage them initially work on getting those referrals. And right now, again, it's going to be Lutathera and Pluvicto, so prostate and neuroendocrine tumors, and really try to do as much as you can to get those volumes up, because I do think there's a lot to be said for being able to generate a program that walks patients through that process as seamlessly and as easily as possible. I also think it's beneficial for providers initially to have some more experience in managing some of the side effects that go with these radiopharmaceuticals. Some of that is going to be questions like, hey, for Pluvicto specifically, what do we do for patients who have a catheter, or what do we do for patients who have a nephrostomy tube? Things that the initial pass as you're generating, your standard operating procedures for your program, you may not think of. Once you've got some volume, I think research and kind of that next level is where it gets really, really exciting. And so my individual practice in Minnesota, we're wanting to make that next step into things like dosimetry. We're planning to start our first trial, but across the network, we have practices that are already doing that. So we've got some practices that have 5, 6 different trials open concurrently. We've got some practices that are starting to do some dosimetry. And what that is, the dosimetry portion for non-radiation oncologists, that's where not only do we deliver the medicine and just say, hey, it's going to go throughout the body and go where it goes, we then do measurements of where that radiation actually went and how it was delivered. Because between the diagnostic scan and the therapeutic injection, there can be differences in how that's delivered. But also, as you do that dosimetry, you can measure dose to certain organs that might be at more risk for damage than others. So kidney would be an area that we commonly worry about, since it processes a lot of these radioactive materials and kicks it out through urine. And so as you do that dosimetry, you can measure specific doses or accumulated doses through different parts of the body as well as at the targets. And then you can get a better idea of, hey, are we giving enough? Are we giving too much? Do we need to go a little bit more? Those next steps I'm really excited about, but we don't know what the right dose is yet, unless you do. Maybe you've got the inside scoop, but that's where it gets really exciting to me is the current ability is we say, well, for Pluvicto, for example, we give 7.4 gigabecquerels or 200 millicuries to every single patient unless they have some toxicity, and then we drop that by 20%. Where I think it's really, really fascinating where external beam went is you can do some individualized dosing depending on, hey, what's happening to the other normal tissues and what's happening in the target tissue. Have you guys started doing some of
Yeah,
that?
early on in our program, we were the first site in Utah to treat these patients. So we got really busy, and I got really obsessed of where some of the thought leaders were talking about where this field was going. And I really got into dosimetry. I have this awesome physicist, Nikki Mon, who's a PhD physicist out of WashU, who also was really interested in implementing dosimetry and clinical trials. And so we partnered really closely with our nuclear medicine department and nuclear medicine physicians who were interested, and we rolled out a SPECT CT imaging program first. That was like the first step, was like implementing a SPECT CT. And for those of you who are not aware, SPECT CT, compared to PET CT, and PET CT, you inject a diagnostic radiopharmaceutical, a PSMA PET, for example, agent, and then you image it right away, that small amount. Well, in SPECT, what you do is you inject the therapy, and then you just have them come back and you read the radioactivity from the therapy. And I could go into the specifics and the physics of all that, but essentially that's the difference is you look at what you just delivered, and you're literally looking at the dose, where the dose went that you just gave the patient. And we built that out in our program. We use that for decision making in patients. Tom Hope has some great work out of UCSF and how that has changed their patient management. We built on that. And then once we had our SPECT CT program, we turned our attention towards building radiopharmaceutical dosimetry, looking at different softwares. We ultimately implemented a software that helped us do it. And we use that on cycles 1, 3, and 6. And predominantly, we're using it for dosimetry dosing, making sure that we're not giving too many cycles for the therapy if the kidney doses exceed. And I've had two or three patients now that I've stopped early because the dose to the kidney exceeded the FDA allowable limit to that organ. So, and then clinical trials, we have phase 1 through 3 clinical trials, built out pharmacokinetic capabilities, PKs. And it's been really cool to be engaged in these early trials, looking at new targets, new isotopes. And ultimately, I think that's what gets you really excited, is helping advance the science in the community.
Yeah, I think that's where, like, you look at some of the pipelines that come out, and I think we've all seen various examples of, if you just Google radiopharmaceutical pipeline, you'll see, Lutathera and Pluvicto in the center, and they're, FDA approved. They've gone through phase 3 trials, and then you go to phase 2, phase 1, and like preclinical stuff. And as you look more and more out there, that's, I think, where a lot of radiation oncologists get really excited, because we look at that and we say, oh my goodness, like, look at these opportunities. How many more patients are we going to be able to have where we put on both of our hats? And we think, oh, well, should I do some external beam? Do I get to save the external beam, and use a radiopharmaceutical? And I think over the next 5-7 years, we're going to see more and more of those get pushed closer and closer to kind of that phase 3 space, where, hey, now we've got really good data that says this is something that works and helps in new and interesting indications.